In this video, I'm going to show you one way to prepare data or your tables in Power BI to use them. Some people can call this data modeling, and this has to do how we relate our tables to each other. Here, I have several tables uploaded into Power BI. Customer, date, product, etc. And if I look at the different tables I have, I'm noticing a pattern. I have customer, date, product, reseller, sales, sales order, and sales territory. So my first impression is that most, if not all of these tables relate to sales in one way or another. So let's just assume that sales is the main table that has all of our sales transactions. Now let's take a quick look at this table. We have sales order, line key, customer key. We have an order date key. We have unit price, sales amount, total cost, etc. So now I'm going to look at one of my other tables. Let's select sales order. And I'm going to check if there's a field that is common between the sales table and the sales order table. And this is what I'm noticing. The sales order line key is in both of these tables. Now I'm going to go to the model view here on the left-hand side, click on this, and I'm going to look for those two tables. Here's the sales table and the sales order table. Now I'm going to look for those two common fields. I'm going to click on one table, either one, and I'm going to drag that onto the same field from the other table. Now ideally, we want this where it says cardinality to be one to many or many to one. In this case, from the sales table many, and from this other table, the sales order, we want it to be one, many to one. So let's try this and see what happens. And here where it says cross filter direction, we want this to be single. And for reference, this cardinality, this has to do with how many times a unique value appears in a column. In this case, in this sales order line key. So we could expect a value to appear multiple times in the sales table, but we want that value to appear only one time per row in this sales order table. And in the cross filter direction, this is talking about in what direction we want Power BI to filter our data. Even though there's different types, the one that is most common and recommended whenever possible is a single cross filter direction. Without going too much into detail, if we select both, this can confuse Power BI, and Power BI might not know how to filter the data in the way we need to see it. So we select single and then save. Now I'm going to repeat this process with the other tables. For example, with the customer table, I see customer key, and on the sales table, I also see customer key. So again, I click on one of those columns and I drag it onto the column that has the same name from the other table. As we can see here, the cardinality automatically says many to one, and the cross filter direction says single. This is exactly what we want. And as a quick reminder, the many side, in this case, I want it to be the sales table, which is our transaction table. And I want the one side of the cardinality to be this customer table, which we can think of as a lookup table, because I want to be able to look up sales information by fields from my customer table. So I'm going to click Save. Now the reseller table, reseller key, drag it onto the reseller key of the sales table. I double check my cardinality, many to one, single direction. And before I click Save, I just want to point this out. On the previous table, we saw our cardinality as many to one. And now in this one, we're seeing one to many. Well, this is okay, because as long as the many side is the sales table, and the other table, in this case the reseller table, is the one side, then I'm okay with that. As a quick example, I'm going to switch the places of these two tables. I'm going to put the sales table on the top and the reseller table here at the bottom to illustrate this. Here's my reseller key, and then reseller key here on the reseller table. And now, as we can see, since the table on the top here is sales, our cardinality changed from many to one, from one to many, now to display many to one, because our sales table is at the top, which means we can have many of the same reseller key, but on the reseller table down here, we only have one reseller key per row. Now I'm going to click Save. Now for the product table. Since I'm starting on the product table, when we see the pop-up, we're going to see one to many. There it is, one to many cardinality. Cross filter direction single, save. Sales territory key. One to many, single direction, save. And now for our date table. Before I create a relationship between the date and sales table, I want to see what date fields my sales table has. So I'm going to navigate to the table view, and I see an order date, a due date, and a ship date. Now I need to decide which of these dates I want to be able to filter and report by. In this case, I want to select the order date. So I'm going to go back to the model view, look for order date, and drag this onto the date key of this date table. Cardinality many to one, cross filter direction single, perfect. Now you might be wondering, what if I need to use two different date columns from the sales table? In this case, we selected order date, but what if we also want to report by the due date? Here are two options. One of them is duplicating the date table and then creating a relationship between your due date key and your new date table. Let me quickly show you how to do that. I'm going to go back to Power Query by selecting Transform Data, Transform Data. I navigate to the date table, right-click on it, and select Duplicate. I hit Close and Apply. Then I select Due Date and create that new relationship. The second way to use more than one date column from the sales table is by creating something called an inactive relationship. Let me show you how to do that. First, I'm going to delete this date table that I just created. Select it, right-click, delete from model. Yes. Now I'm going to select due date from the sales table and drag that onto the date table. Everything looks the same here, except for this box titled Make This Relationship Active. Why is that? Because in Power BI, two tables can have only one active relationship between them. If Power BI would allow more than one active relationship between two tables, Power BI would not know which relationship to use. That's why it only allows for one. Now, that does not mean that you cannot use the inactive relationship. There is a way to activate it. If you want to know how to do that, watch my video on using an inactive relationship. Let's leave this relationship inactive and select Save. And notice the difference in the line between these two relationships. The active relationship has a solid line and the inactive relationship has a dotted line. Now I'm going to make sure I created a relationship with all of those tables. Yes. The next thing I'm going to do is hide the columns that I don't want to use and that I don't want any of my users to be able to use. This is how I would do that. For each of these relationships that I created, I have two fields that are the same. One on my sales table and one on the other table. So I'm going to hide each of these fields or columns from my sales table. So the customer key, I see this little eye icon to the right-hand side of the field name. I'm going to select that, and that's going to hide the field to prevent people from using it. I'm going to do the same with all of these other fields. And you may be wondering, which of these fields should I hide? Should I hide the ones on my sales or transaction table? Or should I hide it on my lookup tables? Or does it even matter? The best practice is to hide these lookup fields on the transaction table so that we can use or leverage those lookup fields from our lookup tables. And lastly, I'm going to organize these tables a little bit. I'm going to collapse this and put my lookup tables at the top. There's one more thing that we need to do with a calendar or date table. So I'm going to navigate to the table view. I'm going to make sure the date table is selected. And then here in our ribbon, we have this icon that says Mark as Date Table. I'm going to select this and I'm going to toggle this on. I'm going to select the date column and select Save. You might be wondering, why do we need to do that? The simple answer is this helps when we are working with any kind of reports where we see data over time in Power BI. It helps Power BI to give us the right results. And this is also known as time intelligence in Power BI. Anytime we work with data and are analyzing it over periods of time. And this is how I like to prepare my data or tables to use them in Power BI, which, like I mentioned earlier, is also known as data modeling and has to do with table relationships. If you'd like to learn more on how to use this prepared data to build a report, watch my video on how to build your first report in Power BI. If you found this information useful, please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.